Get started. Awesome. Thank you, Shay. So welcome everyone. Good to see and hear and actually, yeah, see so many of you because you're on camera with us. So today we are at the third office hour for the first section or phase of our training. And this is the office hour for sharing power, developing non-hierarchical working relationships. I think you all know me by now, but if you don't, I'm Daniela Labate-Cavelli. I'm the Director of Psychiatric Rehabilitation Initiatives at NIAPers. Happy to see so many of you, and happy that I saw so many of you the last couple of days up in Albany at Executive Seminar, if I saw you there. So we're going to get into the office hour today. Rita is with us. If you would mind just advancing the slide for me, Rita, 2 times. We've got our obligatory partner slide with all our partner logos. And then I just want to get through a little bit of housekeeping. So as you heard, today's webinar is being recorded. You'll find the slides as well as the recording on our website, psychrehabacademy.org, in the archived training page. Shay will be putting that up later this afternoon, so you'll have access to it as of tomorrow. All of our participants should complete the evaluation form to accrue CPRP training hours. So take note of the keywords that will come up in the slides for you. We'll need those for the evaluation. We would love for you to communicate with us throughout, either using the chat box feature. You could also raise your hand and we can unmute you. But I do want to just stress there are, like 100 and some odd folks on the meeting today. So we would really prefer that you keep yourself muted until you are speaking, but please do feel free to join us on camera. We also hope that you'll engage in conversation, right? Whether that's through the chat box, and I see many of you have already been doing that. So like I said, chat box, raise your hand. We'll be doing another Slido today because we love a Slido at NIAPers now that CCSI has introduced us to Slido. So we'll be doing that as well. We have a couple of questions that came over in between the last time we met last week and today's office hour. Rita's also going to kind of start with a tiny little bit of a review. And then she's got Stephen Nowotniak, who's our NIAPer staff, who's is it pinch hit? I'm really not a baseball person, but I feel like that's the right term.
Join in.
There you go. He's going to join in today because Lynn had something happened at the last minute and Lynn couldn't join us, but Stephen's going to be here to support Rita a little bit today. So he'll be chiming in as well, and we hope we'll hear from you. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rita to give you a quick sort of introduction about and say something about yourself, Rita.
Hi, I'm Rita Cronise, and I am at this point the co-director of PeerTech, which is a peer support technical assistance center mainly for the integration of peer support into the clinics. That's really our focus for the time being. But I'm a person with lived experience myself. I've done a lot of work with peer support, and the reason I know Steve so well is Steve came to one of my peer support groups and then he ended up taking over, but that's another story for another time. So we've been dear friends for many, many years. So I have been working for 10 years with the Academy of Peer Services. I am an instructional designer by trade. My only real experience with psych rehab is I went to Boston University for one of the certificate programs in psychiatric vocational rehabilitation. So I have a certificate, but I don't have the core knowledge that certainly the BU team has that you're gathering. So I'll be talking today mostly from my experience as a peer specialist, but then being able to hopefully translate some of what I do into what psych rehab practitioners do. So I guess I can turn on to the next slide. And the next slide is the first of our keywords, and that is brown. And I just wanted to review very quickly. Last time we talked quite a bit about what is power and what does power mean to you. And we had some of the Slido word clouds really gave us a good sense of what everybody's impression of power is. And you see control is right there front and center. And I think when we talk about sharing power, what we are really talking about is sharing the control of a person's life and being able to give it appropriately to the person when they can take it, being able to hold it dearly, very carefully and very gently when we need to, But power is strength, power is responsibility, power is authority, power is choice. To me, power really talks to a person's choice, sense of choice. And there's many other words there that talk to power. And then we also had another question and another word cloud that came up of, think of a situation in which you had no power. And this really gets to the heart of what we're talking about with power sharing. When people feel they have no power, sometimes they feel helpless and feel that they just really can't do anything to change the situation. So helpless was the word that came up, and hopeless was one of the next words that came up. But some of the emotional words that came up were angry, vulnerable, frustrated, scared. Those are all kind of the feelings that come around a person and take over a person's, what they're feeling when power is taken away, or when they feel they just don't have power or never had power. In webinar number 2, Lenora talked a great deal about people who have never been given the opportunity to have power in their lives, and what's really required in order to engage people who won't come to services because they see that as a place where they can never have power, how to be able to share power then. One of the questions that came out in the webinar that we wanted to address today is, can you give a specific example on how a provider can minimize the power differential? And in my own life, I've had a number of providers who I've worked with over time, in my own recovery and self-care. And one provider in particular, she's a psychologist, and she just really minimized power differential by disclosing. Now, I know disclosure is not something that all professionals can do, but she would just disclose little parts of her life and parts of her daily life. And it just really made me feel like we had more of an equal footing than me being the one to always be talking and her to always be the one listening about things that were life experience and related to the relationship. So that's one specific example on how a provider can minimize the power differential. I'd like to invite everybody in the chat to think about specific examples of how a provider can minimize the power differential. And while you're chatting in, I'd like to invite Steve to share an example of his own.
Absolutely. And just as a real quick introduction, some of you know me, some of you don't. I'm the training implementation specialist in the Western New York area for the program. I'm a licensed occupational therapist by training. I'm also a peer specialist. I myself have a bipolar condition, and I met Rita because after my hospitalization, the DBSA, Depression Bipolar Support Alliance support group, was the first one that I went to, and Rita was my first facilitator that I was with. So just what I have found in my own life, kind of dovetailing on what Rita said about that disclosure piece, but it wasn't disclosure like I'm struggling with all this stuff and dumping their stuff on me. I'd be saying like, how was your weekend? And then they would turn around and say, my weekend was pretty good, but my lawnmower broke down when I was mowing the lawn, and that was kind of frustrating. So how are you doing today? It just showed the humanity of the individual. They weren't getting into their problems like I had to fix it, but they were just showing that they were a human being who had their own struggles along the way as well, and just normalized the problem, as opposed to being this pristine person who had all the information that reinforced that I was broken. And so that was a big thing. They just humanized the situation. Another factor that I found that's helpful with minimizing the power differential is when people set down the credentials. So instead of it being Dr. So-and-so or, counselor so-and-so, it was just, hey, I'm Steve, how are you doing? And it just helped reduce that power differential by just being able to say the first name and humanizing it. So those were two specific examples that I found and the providers helped with me.
Thanks so much, Steve. And I want to go to the chat for a moment because one really intrigued me, and that was Leon talking about using equal chairs with no table in between. Leon, do you want to jump on and just say a little bit about that?
Hi, Rita. In therapy, using equal chairs with no table it like offers more choice, more opportunity to talk. There's no wall between the two of you, no table or barrier between you. It's just person to person. And having same size chair also makes you more equal than with the person you're receiving services from. So the professional does have a big chair with a big back that is supporting the big back, and you have a little chair with the client chair.
Yeah, thank you. And those barriers, like having a table in between, really does create a barrier that energetically, doesn't allow the relationship to flow as equally. And I've even seen, and I see that this works really well, instead of being opposed to each other, because you can still have this kind of oppositional energy happening, you turn so that you're facing the same direction and you're talking back and forth side by side. And that just changing that dynamic can actually reduce the power differential, because now you're not kind of against each other. Not that you would be against each other, but the energy can feel that way. And instead you're facing in the same direction and heading and moving forward in the same direction. So that's one thing that I see. Absolutely, the environment, the way that we dress, the language that we use. And language is so, so important. When we use language that's about, and I know this is in the environments in which we work, we have to use some language in order to meet the medical necessity. But if we're using language that's making people feel like they're broken or sick or not able to do things, instead of language that's hopeful and helpful. And I once heard a mentor of mine say, it doesn't matter who you are when you're working with people, if you start a conversation with the thought in mind, is what I'm going to say going to bring this person hope, or is it going to steal hope away from the person? When we can bring hope to the person, the language that we're using gives the person some element of hope, then that's a very different experience than using language that takes that hope away from a person. So that was just something I thought would be interesting to share.
Rita, if I can jump in, Kurt Cooper had a really good comment about collaborative documentation, and I will definitely say from the recipient point of view, if I'm talking and the person's just writing notes and kind of doing the whole it's like, well, what are you writing? And it's just it gets very uncomfortable, and then you almost don't want to talk because you're afraid of what's being written down. That's very different than, hey, like you're saying, hey, I'm taking some notes along the way, and this is this kind of what you're saying, and this is what I'm writing down, and it lets it be a process that I'm a part of versus being a judgmental thing. And that definitely, that was cool, because I definitely experienced the discomfort when someone is writing notes that I don't know what they're saying myself personally.
Oh, great example, Steve. And I'm going to jump over to Heather, asking clients about what supports they know of and what information they're experts at. And that just really rang true for me, to allow the person to be an expert at something and to really be curious and interested in what they are an expert about. It also is the different dynamic of asking rather than telling. When we're asking, it invites the person to start to have a relationship with us. When we're telling, it really kind of shuts down that open relationship. So that was a really good comment. Thank you. So presenting an issue with members and ask members what they want. Again, the asking dynamic, yeah. And then doing it, having a member run the group that speaks to what members want without staff participation. Certainly, when people can have a sense of autonomy and a sense that they're not being micromanaged or looked over, to the degree that that's possible, that's really important. Having shared bathrooms, so it's not the staff bathroom versus the client bathroom, and even eating with members. I do a workshop in the prisons, and for a very long time, when we would go in, when we took meals, we took our meals with the people that were in the class, and that made a world of difference to them. And then COVID hit, and we weren't allowed to eat with them anymore. And the difference in dynamic of the relationship that we had with people was really different. And so I'm hoping that we can get back to being able to go and have meals with them.
One other thing I'll jump in on, being able to So a lot of times you look at the counseling, sometimes you're experiencing it where it's one way. Like if I'm the recipient, then I'm receiving things. But but when the provider turned around and said, you know what, Steve, you made me think, about this, and I got something out of our discussion, and I got something from you. You helped me. That helped equalize it a little bit, because now I was contributing to them as much as they were contributing to me. So not being afraid to learn from, to allow people to contribute to you, and let people know that hey, I really liked that, or that kind of stuff, I found very helpful.
Absolutely. Eric mentioned being transparent and letting people know that it's not a one-sided process, and there are many ways of doing that, both in conversation and in body language, and all the things that we had talked about before. And then any color words for today? Yeah, we had one already. I think it was brown. I'm testing my memory. We'll have two more coming up in a little while. Oh, yep, it was brown. Sorry, I'm scrolling through here. Absolutely, being relatable, being authentic, validating the way you talk to an individual, and shared decision making. Validation is such a key way of helping to equalize power, help people feel that they're respected, help people feel that they are worthy, of having their own ideas and having their own opinions, and just really letting people know that what they're saying is okay. That's a great one. Oh, realizing the participant is suffering and show equality and common ground, like that. Using humor is great. Acknowledging how titles can build walls, and using empathy and listening skills. I'm sorry, I'm just kind of reading through this because it's helping me to absorb a lot of the wisdom that you guys are providing. So thank you. Trying to refrain from note taking or being on a computer during the appointment. Yeah, that's such a turnoff. I worked in the VA at one point in time, and I found it just really disconcerting to walk into an appointment, have the person go and sit at their computer with their back to me and asking me questions to fill in, and never ever really giving me eye contact. That really did not make me feel like I was in a good relationship with the person. And collaborative documentation, absolutely.
Yeah, there's a big difference between writing notes about something and writing notes with something. Like when I went to my psychiatrist, I mean, I understand that sometimes they're saying that you have to do writing while you're doing the session because of timing and productivity and all that kind of stuff. Some people have to deal with that thing, but there's that difference between, like we were saying earlier, just writing as someone's talking versus, hey, is this what you're saying? Is what you're thinking? And this is kind of what we're doing, and including it in the process. Those are two different ways to write while you're working with somebody. And that makes a big difference how it's done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I love the idea, if you can, offering tea or coffee or something to drink, that's a great idea. And then going back to something that they're the expert in and saying, gosh, I don't know anything about that. Can you tell me a little bit about that? And it really helps them to feel that they're teaching you. So that changes the dynamic of the relationship right away. Love the collaborative documentation. Yeah. So I'm just reading through.
Oh, Danielle, that's a good point. If the client doesn't have access to food or drink, not eating in front of them. Very cool. Very cool. Yeah.
Yeah. And absolutely not taking phone calls unless you absolutely have to. The cell phone ring, I remember, we were in a training at one point, and we had a psychiatrist who was constantly taking phone calls in the middle of this training. And it just felt so disrespectful to us, when we were trying to train, and that one person would just in and out and in and out. It was like, how much did they really absorb? And it just did not show respect to those of us that had created the training to begin with. Not a fan of having superior know-it-all attitudes. Yeah.
And so hopefully what's going on with this question and interaction is that you're having a chance to have some things that you are doing already validated, to know that, hey, you know what, I am doing some things well, and that I am on track with stuff. Maybe by the wisdom of the group, what I think this really shows is that as a group, we have a lot more wisdom than us as an individual. And that's a big thing with peer support. And so maybe you're hearing some things that other people are doing that you're like, you know what, that is a good idea. I can incorporate that as well. So as opposed to this being something like we're delivering information at you, we're doing this collectively. And I think it models a little bit about the peer approach and the psych rehab approach is working together towards a goal and allowing that collective wisdom to guide the process.
Such an important point, Steve. And I took my breath away for a minute here when I looked at Kurtz, when he said allowing the participants to grieve the end of a working relationship as opposed to leaving abruptly. Now, I have a personal experience with this from last year because my psychiatrist of 20 years, who I dearly, he was just the best psychiatrist ever. And he very abruptly ended his practice, and nobody knew why, but it turned out he had esophageal cancer, and he just couldn't continue and couldn't disclose apparently what was going on. And it was really disconcerting to just be dropped after 20 years and then to get a notice that he died, but that's an extreme example. But when there's the end of any working relationship, especially if it's been a good working relationship, people will definitely feel that loss. And that loss can really be disconcerting in a way that can be, can really affect people's health. So, yeah, not bringing the laptop, not doing notes during, but really being very mindful of and present with people. Yeah. And making sure that we're not belittling other people or feeling superior. So that's the chat. Thank you so much, everyone. What you contributed was just way more than I expected, and really, really rich and powerful. So I think I have control to move to the next slide. And we have now another color, yellow. So we had brown in the beginning and we've got yellow now. So this is going to be an opportunity for you to do one of those Slido word clouds. So if you can think back on interactions you've had with providers, what actions made the biggest impact on building trust with them? And this is in your own life, working with providers, or you can think of people that have come to you that you recognize have what you've done to build trust. So in a word or phrase, share one word about how you can build trust.
And I'll even throw this out there. If you haven't had a provider yourself, you can just think about it like a supervisor, like just someone in an authoritative position. What do they do to help you build trust? Because one of the things that I've realized is that a lot of personal growth or professional growth and development uses the same skills and tools in a therapeutic situation. It's just a slightly different context. So if you don't have the experience of a provider, think about when you had a supervisor or a teacher, or just connecting with someone who had authority, what was done.
These are great. So empathy seemed to be winning the race, but respect just came up too. Listening, authenticity. I mean, those four, absolutely. But having that sense of empathy is so key. Transparency. And I love some of the other ones along the sides, like genuine concern, positive, the whole thing about positive regard, positive unconditional regard.
There's some stuff in the chat box too, Rita. We've got presence, validation, empathy, appreciation, listening and responding, some more validation, honesty, another listening, more empathy, more validation, and rephrasing was another one.
These are excellent.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I found, so as I mentioned in the beginning, from my provider hat, from my occupational therapy hat, I know that when I was working with clients, I was doing a lot of stuff in the phys diz world, like helping out with rehab and all that kind of stuff. And I felt this pressure, like I had to have all the answers. And so it was a me and them thing. And that puts stress on me. And when especially when I was young in the process, I thought that I had to have it all figured out, that I had to give the answer, and that I had to be the expert in the room. And that was very stressful. And so one of this approach is where we're doing things together and with each other. And I actually found that decreased the stress as well as building trust with people. So we just want to acknowledge that when you're having that power differential, it can be stressful when you feel like you have to have more power that way. And these are all great answers as ways to help build that trust. And hopefully what you're able to experience is it's a way to help decrease some of the stress level that as a provider you can have.
So as the Slido is going on, I want to go back to our original question if I can. I think I might be able to go back. Maybe not. Maybe I can only
I
go.
think you have to click back twice.
No, it's not going. Shay, is there any chance that you can go back just one slide?
Oh,
Nope.
we went ahead. Oh. There we
Okay.
go.
So thinking back on interactions you've had with providers, what actions have made the biggest impact on building trust with them? And I'll go to my psychiatrist this time because he was just an amazing person. He came from the osteopath tradition, but he also had studied Eastern philosophy, Western philosophy, shamanism, and he did an equine therapy program where he had his own horses and he brought veterans in mostly to work with the horses, but he also had workshops where he brought the community in. And, he was constantly talking about how in working with horses, you have to build trust with them. You can't work with them otherwise. And he said a lot of his approach was about, making sure that people felt safe, making sure people felt secure, taking it slow, if, kind of pacing with the person, really paying attention to how fast a person wanted to go forward in whatever work they were doing, or allowing them to hold back and just to the point where they felt safe. And so I think for me, he did that throughout the times that we worked together. And there were times when I would make different leaps as far as the work that I was doing with him. And in each instance, when I was starting something new, he knew that I had a lot of anxiety about starting something new. So he always built that feeling of trust, that feeling of safety, that I was in a safe place. He was there to catch me, if I felt like I was taking too much of a risk. And, that was just a cherished relationship that I had. Steve, do you have one?
Yeah, for me, I could always sense when a person was trying to fit me into their agenda. And what I mean by that is they had to go over certain things, or they had a preconceived notion of what was going on, or they were focused on what other tasks they had to do and get through. And that all stuff made me feel less than and unimportant, and so I didn't trust them. But the person who was able to turn around and say, how are you doing today, and what are your interests, and work with me, and then they kind of afterwards, I could tell they were working into what they needed to do to fulfill their documentation requirements, but it was focused on me and what I was doing versus what box they needed to tick off and get done. That was definitely something I could hear loud and clear. And yeah, and so when they were focused on me and what I wanted, then I definitely felt more trust.
Thanks so much, Steve. So let's see how our cloud came out. We've got transparency, we've got authenticity, we've got dependability. That's a huge one, because how can you trust somebody that's not dependable? Empathy, so knowing that people feel that you care. Respect is a huge one. And all of these are just incredibly powerful ways of building trust. And this is going to be another one of those clouds that we're going to keep and look back on as ways in which we can build trust. So moving forward, I think, can I move forward? I think the Slido doesn't allow me to move backward or forward. So are we at the questions already? I thought there were slides after the Slido.
There's
Nope,
slides
I think
after the
wait,
questions.
go back. I think this is where we were going to open it up and see if anybody in the audience here had questions from anything they heard last week or anything that came up between last week and this week, thinking about kind of some of the interactions that you've all had with participants that are coming for services. And if there's anything that we can answer for you.
And I think you can raise your hand if you want to not just type in the chat, but actually say something about an experience you've had with trying to share power or being very successful in sharing power. Those are the ones that we'd really be interested in hearing about. So I actually have, and I can go to this.
Rachel has her hand up.
Oh, go ahead.
Hi, I'm so sorry about the video. My computer kind of sucks. I was basically about sharing power. I think it's on an emphasis of making sure that the participant or even the client that you're working with knows that you're there as a consistent basis of improvement, not to make them feel insufficient or feel as they're numerical in your curriculum that you're working in. I think it's more so as helping one another in a positive aspect, as well as learning from them and growing from them, as well as you growing from them and learning what's the aspect of what's good, what's bad, and what's the pro. You always have to make sure that that person knows that they are there for their own independence, not more so as, I guess, in a retrospect, making sure that you're not their puppeteer or the cast over for them, as like I say, in a perspective way, because working where I'm at now is more so as like being the puppeteer or the feel of, okay, this is what you should do and this is how you should do it and this, that, and third. I have like a kind of a feeling of like, okay, I really can't do that, because I rather want you to share with me instead of making me feel like I have to constantly share with you or make you feel like, okay, significantly small. And that's what I really kind of have a problem with at where I'm at in a standstill. So it's just more so, I think, with learning how to balance power as well as balance their environment, as well as balance the teamwork that you have to work with your clients is so endearing, but it's enlightening at the same time. So
Thank you.
it's I'm learning now as I'm growing into this human service arena with me, because I have been in it like for only like 4 years. So I'm learning as I'm like progressively going through this, and I'm just like, I'm always having aha moments, and I'm just like, okay, it's me. It's not them. It's me.
Thank you. So I'd like to invite Daniela to share a little bit of her perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Rita. So, and I think, oh, you just you moved off my screen and I don't remember the person who was talking's name. I'm so sorry.
Rachel.
Rachel, thank you, Steve. So Rachel, I just wanted to kind of address something that I felt when you were talking. Your opinions very much align with the principles of psych rehab, right? So when we talk about sharing power in psych rehab, right, we're really talking about giving the participant the hope and sort of, you know, pulling them up and showing them that they have the control over the situation that we're trying to sort of move them along in over the process of psych rehab, right? When we talk about, you know, assessing readiness, for example, and we'll get into all these interventions when we get into the learning modules in the next phase of the training. But when we talk about assessing readiness, we literally speak with the participant, you know, and ask them questions and help them they really guide the conversation. We're there to just support the conversation, right? But they're sharing with us, they're taking the lead here about, you know, am I ready to set a goal? Am I ready to even think about, before even setting a goal, am I ready to even take part in this process of psych rehab?
Right. And that's the part that is just like, I don't want to force it. And I don't want to feel so I wouldn't say in depth, but almost constrictive on them, you know?
Right.
And that's like the part that I'm like kind of having a problem with internally with myself. Cause it's just like, I feel like a mother bear. I'm like, okay, you're ready. You're so ready. And, and it's just like, it's like a click in me and says like, no, let them be their own judge. And it's so hard to like kind of defer from that. I mean, like really to deter from that, really. And that's is like a complex with this. And I'm like, am I doing this right? And I really have to have like a little self-doubt. And I'm just like, I can't do that because sometimes some of my clients will look at me like, okay, she's kind of second guessing or making it seem like, okay, she's unsure. And it's not that I'm unsure. It's just that I want to make sure that you're capable and you're willing enough to step out there to make sure that, yes, I need this, that, and third. That's what I'm having the conflict, internal conflict with myself with.
Well, and in recovery-oriented psych rehab, especially, you know, when we train on recovery at NIAPRS, for example, you know, we always talk about the dignity of risk. And I know I ran a PROS program, I worked in a CDT, I ran an IPRT, I worked with people, you know, one-on-one individually before I became a supervisor. And especially when I was newer in the field, I felt like I had to, notice the words, I had to make sure that my clients were okay, right? And I burnt out so fast because we have to give, I didn't learn. I had to learn as a practitioner that we had to give people the dignity of risk and the dignity to make mistakes and to fail. And that's okay.
Mm-hmm. I get, yeah, it's just, I'm learning that now. And like I said, I'm new and I'm around veterans in here. So I'm like, okay, I'm learning, you know, gradually and understanding now. So it's just like, I'm having my aha moments in this.
Well, thank you for being so vulnerable and putting yourself out there. You've got some shout outs in the chat box. Other folks are saying that it's hard for them too. So folks can identify with you. So thank you for sharing that. Richard, I know you had your hand up also. Did you want to jump in and say something?
Yeah, I did.
Sure.
I think it's easier being a peer guide if you're a people person. And it's give and take in every relationship between any peer guide and participant, you know, and you shouldn't feel higher than anyone else or lower for that matter, you know. And also everyone learns in every conversation, you know, they're not only learning, you're learning too, between the peer guide and participant.
Well said, you know, because as peers, you know, it doesn't always work out that way when you're in a system where you do have sort of a hierarchy because of the kind of work that you have to do. But in a relationship, we ought to be equals and equal but different because each of us comes with different areas of expertise. Like we were talking before, the example that came to mind was the person who knew about Pokemon. And I didn't know about Pokemon. So I asked the person to share their expertise with me. In that moment, they weren't superior. They just had more knowledge about a topic that was of interest. And that's where the ebb and flow of the conversation and the ebb and flow of the relationship should go, is whoever happens to have more expertise at any given moment is the one who maybe helps the other person to gain that expertise. So, any other thoughts?
I'd like to pose a question to the group, if I might. Thinking about what you heard in the meeting last week and then our conversation today, what might you change or tweak in your work, whether you're in a core provider situation or a pros program, or maybe you're providing psych rehab in a CCBHC? What might you change based in your daily practice with folks based off of what you've heard today or last week?
That's an awesome question, because it's easy to like listen to something and to hear ideas, but then to apply it to what I can do personally, that takes it to another level. So that's a really good question.
It wasn't a rhetorical question. I'd love to see your answers in the chat box. Oh, there we go. It's like they all just start happening all at once. Talk less and listen more. Yeah, I like that, Heather. I think one thing I learned early on was around, and I learned because I didn't have great success with what I was doing, was because I wasn't really asking open-ended questions. I wasn't really practicing active listening, and that sort of helped sort of change the differential a little bit. Being more mindful of the power differential, yep, especially with language and documentation.
And that piece about making sure a client isn't afraid to disagree with me, that's awesome, because from a participant perspective or a client perspective, the system teaches you to comply and stresses compliance versus thought. And so if you disagree, then you become it's easy to be thought of as a non-compliant, resistive, mentally ill patient. And there's so much heaviness and disempowerment in that perspective. So giving someone that opportunity to disagree, to have that independent thought, that's huge. So that was a really good point that you were saying.
Yeah, and I love what Kayla is saying, reminding the client that they're the expert of their own lives. And I'll say, yes, and how do you do that? You know, and again, it's the gently asking the person about their life so that they can share that. You know, it's the areas of the life, because so much of it, when we think about it, the social determinants of health, like where people are living, if they have enough food, if they've been educated, you know, all of those areas of their life that are maybe not directly related to what we're providing treatment for, but impact the success of that treatment. Those are the areas where they are experts in their own life. Nobody else knows what their life is like outside of that.
Isabel, that's a good point about unless we do self-analysis and reflection, we would never improve. And you know what? Giving people permission to improve, like nobody should be the same as they were 10 years ago, and everybody has had challenges along the way, and normalizing personal growth and development. And that's a big difference, that perspective between coping with an illness and trying to fix an illness versus growing and developing as a person. And I think that those two perspectives lead people in different trajectories. So that's a really good point that you brought up.
And I'd like to also point out what Alex just said about making sure the client is aware that they're the ones in control of their journey. And when we did the word cloud the first in the webinar, control popped out, and that really resonates with me about what power is really about. Who has control of my life? And so helping people to, if they don't have control, helping them to gradually regain it and know that they have control of their own life is so important.
These are awesome, everybody.
Yeah,
These are very cool.
so again, the main voice or control, you know, helping people find their voice. Somebody before said, you know, afraid to disagree, afraid to not comply. Why? You know, the ability to give voice to the reasons why something is happening is really hard when people are living in fear, particularly people who have gone through severe kinds of trauma. It's not always easy to find your voice. It's not always easy to unfreeze or to be able to say what you really feel. So creating that safe space, like my psychiatrist did for me, where I could speak openly about anything that was going on with me, that's so important.
And Kathy said something that was pretty cool too, about remaining open to improving your skills. Like, it's so easy to be, from a provider perspective, to think, okay, I know what I need to do. I've heard this before, and just to allow yourself to grow. Maybe you see something from a different perspective, maybe, and to know that that we as providers are on that growth journey as well. And again, it normalizes it. It's not about someone being sick or broken trying to get fixed. It's about, we're all on this path of improving, and we're all on this path of growing, and we can do that path together. So yeah, ourselves being open to improving and growing is awesome.
And I love what Janet said, expecting and believing that change is possible. That's so much of the power of peer support, is that peer support shows that people do recover, and that belief that people can changes many people's ability to even start on that path. So believing recovery is possible, believing that things can change, that is so, so important.
Sharon, you raised your hand. If you're talking, you're on mute.
Hold on. Okay, sorry about that.
That's all right.
I want to say we were trying to build the trust and be on the same level as them. And I think just as you did when you introduced yourself, the first thing I do is try to introduce myself to them and let them know some of the struggles we've gone through, or what our life is like, or something that we can relate on. Because we know a little bit about the clients before we start with them, working with them. And it helps to find a connection. And, you know, to let them know that we're not judgmental and that we're not the expert. I did have a client I just met a couple of months ago with schizophrenia, which is not, I don't know much about it. And after me opening up to her a little bit, she taught me so much about her disorder that I was able to help her more. So I think it's important that we humanize ourselves to them.
Nice.
Excellent.
Well, and I want to be mindful before we wrap up. I'm not sure we saw the last color. Let me see if I can find that. Go back and find it. Uh-oh, I'm stuck again. Shay, help. There we are. So, what were the colors?
First one was brown.
Yep.
Second one was
Then-
yellow. And this one is orange.
Yep.
And Rita, I've got 2 more slides towards the end. I just have a couple of a little commercial announcement here, if I might, before we wrap up.
Absolutely.
Thank you. So I just want to remind folks that there is a podcast that Rita recorded with Martha Barbone on this topic. I thought it was a really great 22 minutes, I want to say it came to. Great conversation. Sort of, I always feel like I'm eavesdropping on a really good conversation when I listen to these podcasts. And it really does sort of tell the story of sharing power. So if you haven't already, I really would encourage you to listen to that podcast. You can do that on the training page where we link to either Spotify or to YouTube, where you can hear the recording there. And then if you move us to the next slide, please, Rita. I would like to also remind you to register for the May webinar, which is taking place on Wednesday, May 10th from 2 to 3:30. And that's on creating
matter,
an
Mia?
organizational culture that promotes recovery and the implementation of psych rehab. So I understand that there may be a little bit of a conflict with the May webinar with some other training that folks are involved in, but rest assured, we will also be recording that one. But if you can, we'd love to see you live.
And I
Thanks so
know-
much, Ella. Go ahead, Steve.
Oh, I was just going to say, I just really wanted to thank everybody for their openness, for their contribution to the conversation. I learned a lot from it. I grew a lot from it. I really appreciate everybody's participation. It was very, very cool.
And we're the experts on ourselves, but we're also the experts in helping other people too, right?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Rita, and thank you, Stephen. And thanks to all of you for joining us today. I'm going to ask Shay, if you haven't already, would you just pop that evaluation link into the chat box? Our new practice is to pop the evaluation link right in at the end. So if you want, you can fill out that evaluation right now. It'll take you all of 3 minutes because it's just the keywords. And you'll accrue your CPRP hours. If you're listening to us recorded, you'll have access through the email that you got with the link to the recording. Have a great rest of your afternoon, everyone, and we hope to see you soon. Take care.
Thank you.